Orthodox. Welcome to Everyday Orthodox. I'm your host, Elisa Bielatich-Davis. We get together here on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians, and we're just building up church unity one person at a time, right? We're just doing it the old-fashioned way. We have Mike here producing the show. Simon is producing the YouTube video, and I don't want to take up any more time because I'll tell you what, our guest was on before and we ran out of time, which we knew would happen because when Sophia and I get to talking, we just go and go and go for hours. And we were like, how will we maybe limit this to 1 hour? And we couldn't. So she's back and we're going to go back into this story because there's so much wonderful stuff to talk about. But just to remind you, Sophia Kellachow is a science teacher. She's a wife and a mother. She has a passion for education and for church music. She's a beekeeper. And honestly, I don't know how to sum up Sophia very quickly, but I feel like you'll know by listening to her. She's energetic. She's brilliant. She's lovely. And she's really inspiring, in fact. So let's just go. Let's just talk. Sophia, welcome to the program.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it so much. I'm so happy to be with you again. And
well, I'm so glad.
I'm humbled by what you just said because I don't see that. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming back because, I value your friendship so much and I enjoy you so much. And I know when you and I first met, we'll put in a little plug for the Ancient Faith Women's Retreat, which is really cool. And you do make good friends there. It's really neat because it's just this weekend of deep conversation and prayer. And you sit down and you start talking about things that mean something, right? The things that matter. It's not chit chat. It's not where'd you go to college?
We didn't just meet as people. I'm going to put in another plug. You were the speaker there. And,
that's true.
And your warmth and ability to tell your story was just overwhelming to me. And I'm going to throw it out there. I'm going to throw out the gauntlet now live that I want to come back a third time and I want to interview you as an everyday Orthodox.
I like that idea. I like that very much. I think that's cool. But no, it is interesting because when I go speak places, a lot of times I will talk about my own life and talk about loss and grief and all kinds of things. And the really neat thing that happens is it opens up space for other people to start sharing. And so it is really wonderful because I end up really getting to know people because it's because I step up first and I'm vulnerable. And then it's okay, well, then we'll be vulnerable right back. And so it's beautiful.
That parents group that you led was over the top great.
Wasn't that cool? But that was because of the people in it.
Everybody had a narrative, right? They had their own narrative and it was just, we were all together on the same playing field with the same faith, the same God, the same, basic guts, but a different narrative. And, it was really neat to see how everybody was navigating their own.
Yeah, it really was. Well, and that's what I like about this show, right? It's that same sort of thing that we have so much in common in terms of kind of this, what binds us together and what undergirds what's our foundation. But at the same time, we have different challenges and different personalities, and it just sort of works its way out in very different and beautiful ways. I love it.
And a lot of emotions are the same. A lot of the emotions are the same.
Oh yeah.
They vary in degrees, but I think we all have a lot of those same emotions, and I think we could be help relate with other people, help them get through their struggles.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's really nice. I love the women's retreat. I love being able to do this show. I like connecting with people. I think that's what God created us for. And so here we are doing it. But so when you and I spoke at the retreat, though, we talked a lot about your whole life story. And so I knew that there were all kinds of really big events coming in the story, and we just didn't even get to them because we were we were going through all the stuff. And so just at the very tail end of the show, all of a sudden you were talking about how your husband died. And so when you were young, you got married and you converted to Orthodoxy right at the exact same time that you got married, which is common. And you had this wonderful, delightful husband. and he passed away very suddenly. Was it a plane crash?
Yep.
Let's remind us, because I know we were just at the end of the show and I was like, oh my gosh, it is completely insane to cut this off here. Like, this is the worst possible stopping point.
No, it was actually the best possible stopping point, right?
Well,
Because
in retrospect,
any cliffhanger.
Yep. At the end of the show, we'll tell the audience why it was the most beautiful stopping point, but and why it's wonderful to pick up about a month later, because it's been kind of a cool month for you. But let's go back. So you had met your husband, who was OCA, and his whole family was, and they lived right near St. Tikhon's, right? And so you were like
a mile away.
Yeah, and so you were going to St. Tikhon's, which of course are at the seminary. So of course you have all kinds of wonderful, beautiful, right? It's not like just your average parish with one nice guy priest. It's all these like brilliant minds and deep thinkers and beautiful people. And so, so tell us what happened.
So it was pretty crazy because I had been, and I need to give a little background. I'm going to sound like Elizabeth Taylor here. I had been married 3 times. Okay.
That's allowed. The church is fine with that.
Now. Well, we're not going again. I'm not done.
Right.
But I have a trinity of marriages, and my first marriage was to my high school sweetheart, and he had been a binge drinker.
Right.
So it's okay.
That's why we didn't get to the next story, because we were talking about him.
Right. Because he was a drinker. Yep.
Yeah.
This is where I believe my daughter's problem stemmed from, because there was mental illness and alcohol abuse and things like that in his family. And, after the promises and promises and promises, like a binge drinker is a different type of person, because I feel it's harder to escape the clutches of a binge drinker because they're not drunk all the time.
Yeah.
Where someone who struggles with alcohol all the time drinks like daily, where he would not drink, but then when he would drink until he passed out, and I would be like trying to make sure that he doesn't like die in his comatose state or anything.
Right.
So there were there were times that he would become agitated, but he never hit me. But he would like smash things and get very ugly. And then the promises, to cut this part short, because this is really nothing compared to the other, right?
Right. Yeah, we have to get to the rest of the story. But it's true. It is a harder thing. I like that you point that out, that it's a harder thing with a binge drinker because it's not constant. So you seem like
times
you feel kind of like a jerk for wanting to leave on a day when he's not drinking. But so you had a daughter together.
Yeah.
And now
he had said to me, I'll quit drinking when we get married. So we get married. We live in our apartment for a year. We buy, he continues to drink. Well, I'll quit drinking when we get a house. So we buy a house. Continues to drink. And at this point, he's also having some, I don't know if he actually was like full-fledged cheating, but I know he was having encounters with other women because there was evidence and things like that. But, and then, he had like Hustler magazines that he's hiding under the floor mat of the car when I went to clean it. So, I mean, there's a lot of like ugly stuff that I just didn't want as part of my marriage. Then he said, well, when we have a child, after we have a baby, then I'll quit drinking. And I was like, of course. What? This is madness. I got to a point where I was like, either one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to leave now, make a break, and just cut my losses and, do the best with what I've got to work with, or I'm going to stay for the next 20 years, raise the kid, and be like, wow, that was just a train wreck of a life for this child. I just didn't want to put her in that environment. Yeah. So I left, and I had to have, over the course of like 5 years, I had to have 2 PFAs because he would stalk me and follow me, and I wasn't doing anything. I mean, I finally just, I started carrying a baseball bat in the back of my car just in case I needed to defend myself. And finally I got to the point where, and he wasn't very good. I mean, like he'd wear a camouflage hat in a parking lot. Right.
You knew he was there. So
come on, your car is not a tree, So finally, I just pulled up to my house and I said, listen, I'm tired of this. You can see what I'm doing. I'm going in to give Kate a bath, and you want to sit out here and watch the lights in the window all night, help yourself, but I'm done. And eventually that kind of, eased out. But, he would get agitated and I think dealing with himself and his own regret and his remorse. And, you know, I again had to have one because he was and this is part of the problem that led into my daughter's issues. You know, he would like threaten to drag her out of the car and just always like bullied her. He was not a great parent. And, you know, there were times that she wouldn't go with him because she would just be far too worked up. So, you know, she had a lot going against her between the nature nurture in that environment and,
Right.
you know, trying to survive back and forth between a home and things like that. So I hope I did the right thing by getting her out of that environment, but, you know, only God knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, I don't know. I think it's fair to say that we could guess that, yeah, you did the right thing. I think so. But I mean, I think it's reasonable to assume that there would have been more abuse and more abuse and more abuse. And we can't assume that everything would have gotten better when there was no sign that things were getting better.
No.
And
we had done counseling and things like that. And, you know, he hated every counselor because this one's a woman and this one is a nun and this one, you know, it's so like, all right, we're done.
Well, but so you had, I mean, I think you had plenty of good reason to be divorced. And so then, you know, we talked a little bit about how you met your next husband and you're like thinking about orthodoxy and you're thinking about marrying him.
Crazy. It was crazy.
And so I can't remember, you were not actually Orthodox when you got married, right? Okay. No. That's what I thought.
Well, it's kind of cool. So what happened was I like to try and stay physically fit. So I was going to the gym and there was this guy that, you know, would talk to me every so often. He ended up doing some training with me. And, you know, we would go for walks. Yes, very light, nothing heavy. He's like, hey, you ever seen anybody skydive before? And I said, not in real life. He's like, well, I skydive. Why don't you come up and watch? So I go up to this drop zone by a place called St. Tikhon's, which we talked about in the last, in the Sophia part 1. And I met my soon-to-be husband, and so I never got to marry him in the church, and we never got to receive the sacraments together. And I'm going to throw a plug out right now. If you are a person who is in a relationship where your husband or wife is on the fence about coming into the church, you know, I want to encourage them to come in with you, because one of the things that just pains my heart is that we never got to go to the chalice together and receive communion together and celebrate the feast together as a married couple. I was in the Catholic Church, he was in the Orthodox Church, and we were going back and forth. Our son was baptized on December 5th. He died on Theophany on January 6th. And our church wedding was scheduled for February 12th. So like we eloped on December 23rd. And there's a whole story behind that I can share with you if we have the time. You know, really it's kind of relevant but irrelevant, but nonetheless, here we are. And I remember on our son's baptism, actually, while I was pregnant with him, he and I had a conversation, and it's interesting because I just visited with his mother this past week when I picked up our daughter from St. Tikhon's camp, another plug, if you're interested. And I remember I was walking into the house and I was like, oh my gosh, this is where my journey to Orthodoxy was sealed, right in this spot. And I just kind of stopped for a minute. And I told my daughter and my current husband about what happened right there. So I was pregnant with my son, Vlad. And my husband said to me at the time, he said, so what are we going to do about baptizing this baby? And I was like, I don't know. So he said, well, you know, I think it's something that we need to talk about. And I said, you know what? I have an idea. Little did I know how orthodox this idea was going to be, because I think it's who I was to begin with, was an Orthodox Christian. I said, well, how about this? If the baby is a girl, we can baptize her in the Catholic Church, at my church. And if it's a boy, we'll baptize him in your church, which just seems like a really kind of organic Orthodox kind of idea, right? And I can just see God, like as one of the fairy godmothers in the Cinderella story, make it pink, make it blue, make it pink, make it blue. Him and Satan are dueling over what color this baby is going to be. And it was a boy, and we decided that, of course, he would be baptized in St. Pecans. So I will never forget Father Leo Poor, who was the dean of students at the time. He baptized our son, and I had been to baptisms before, but not my own baby. And when this freshly chrismated, illumined, beautiful baby is laid up in front of the altar, and the priest calls me up to pick him up, and it was just like the closest to heaven I've ever been. And he says, and now it's the job of the parents to raise him in the faith. And I was like, oh, brother. I felt like if I stood there nodding my head and said yes and didn't do something, I would be a huge hypocrite, because how can I raise him in the faith if I'm not in this church and I don't know this faith? So after the service, I went over and I said, you know what? I said, you got me. Sign me up. I said, I'm ready to come into the church. And he said, okay. That. He said, well, let's wait until, this and this happens. And then, we'll sit and talk. We wanted to get the formal marriage done. And then we were going to talk. And we could spend a whole other show talking about the miracle of my son, because he physiologically, medically shouldn't be able to be here, because there was only a 10% at best chance that my husband could produce child because of a medical issue. So, I mean, the fact that he's here is miraculous. And the timing of it is just so providential, because here, we have this child, and then 10 weeks later, my husband dies. And it was because of that child that I came into the church and stayed in the church. So if that whole thing hadn't happened the way that it did, it was like God knew. Imagine that. God knew what was going to happen and what needed to happen, and could see even far into the future what the ripple effect is. It's incredible. So even though I was like, okay, so here, baby is baptized. We had the conversation. January 6th comes along, and I get a phone call, and I'm thinking, if that is him telling me he's going to be late again, I'm going to be so mad at him. And it was the airport calling me, telling me that there was a plane crash. And the guy that called me on the phone knew that he died, but didn't want to tell me. They told me where he was, and I gathered the kids up and I drove down to the hospital. And two of the girls that I was at school with, because I was still, I had just gone back for my first week as for my internship as a physical therapist assistant. And there were these girls that I was working with at school that, lied and said they were my sisters and came to the hospital to meet me because they had seen it on television. I hadn't seen it. So, I stood there in the room with the doctor, and he said, he told me that he died, that, the man that was flying the airplane, is dead. And I said, well, there were two of them. What about the other guy? And he said, he died too. It was like, it's that instinct of ours to hold on to the very last thread of hope or light that we can find. And I had the difficult honor of going in and identifying his body that night. And, it's a really difficult thing. I took our son in and, laid him up against him for like the last time, and just asked the guys at the hospital if they would please just treat his body with dignity, because there was nothing else to do. So I went home with the kids that night and tried to make sense of things and pull it together. And I don't know how I did. I really don't know how I did. I drove home with the kids, and the doctor was like, well, do you want any Valium? And I'm like, I'm nursing. I can't. So, but, it was truly through God's grace. Yeah. Really through God's grace. And, that was a springboard for so much growth. And, at the time I couldn't see it, but, he really laid a path for us. And I believe that I almost feel like his sole purpose was to just get that kid here and get us into the church. And it was like, okay, I'm out, my job's done. But it was very beautiful because he had served with Metropolitan Herman, who at the time was Father Joseph Sweitko, just a priest many moons ago. And Metropolitan wanted to serve his funeral, which he did. And it was very beautiful and heartfelt. First Orthodox funeral I had ever been to. Yeah, right. I know, right? And when we met with him, he said, well, his funeral will be January 10th. And he said, your Chrismation day is going to be February 14th. And I said, okay. And I was like, okay, I didn't know what all of this was all about because I hadn't even become a catechumen. As a matter of fact, I don't even know if I became a catechumen ever. I don't know if I had the catechumen prayers. I must have, but I don't remember.
Well, I think they can be added into the baptism. That's my guess. Because I was never a catechumen either.
Baptized. Okay.
Well, yeah. Well, and you know what? It may just be that if the circumstances are such that it's not needed, it's not needed.
I don't know, but
because I wasn't either, and I think a lot of times people aren't. It just sort of depends on the circumstance.
Okay.
But you're clear. You're all clear. It's an official. Well, it's official. You're definitely Orthodox. Don't worry.
Okay. Every day, almost Orthodox. Mr. Chrismation.
Get her off the show. She's not Orthodox. No.
Where's the cane? But
so you just sort of knew at that point that you were just going to raise both of the kids in the church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it did it for me. And really when we saw Metropolitan and he assigned me to one of the monks to do my catechumen training, my catechumenate. And because like I said, I only lived a mile from the monastery, so I would go down and I did it at the seminary, which does that count for something? Do I get a degree?
Yes, I think you have a mini degree.
Honorary. I need an honorary
Pretty sure.
degree. Hello, St. Tikhon's. Honorary degree here. Kell. No. But what had happened was within 1 month's time, I had a baby in there, baptized on December 5th, and I had a husband buried on January 10th. And I saw how they treat the body from birth to death, or as we say, womb to tomb. And I knew that there was absolutely no other path for me. And when you're in that raw of a state, I mean, think about the excitement of this new baby who was just perfect, still is perfect, mind you, Vlad, right? And then you go from this incredible high down to this lowest of lows. I think you're so much more spiritually sensitive. And Father Nicodemus of Blessed Repose worked in the church, and he was such an incredible mentor to me. It seemed like whenever I came to the church, and it was often, he was always there, and he was quiet and wise, long beard, gentle man, and he would just say a couple of words, and it would be like, he's right. And then I would kind of pull it together and go on. And, the day that we buried my husband, the day that we buried him, we walked out and it was actually really so beautiful. We processed on foot from Monastery Church to the cemetery where he's buried, and the bells were ringing, and there was just such heaviness and sadness, but even before I was Orthodox, I felt the bright sadness. I felt what that was like because this was such a intensely spiritual moment, and to be sharing it with the church, it was so intimate and personal, and to be sharing it with the church was just, I can't even put words into it. But everybody left when they lowered the casket down, and I stayed. And Father Nicodemus stayed carrying the cross the way he always would in the front of a procession. And I stayed until they, started covering the casket. And he and I exchanged just a few words. And he said, well, that's a Jewish tradition where the family would stay and make sure that the casket was covered. And I didn't know that. It was just an instinctive thing to do,
Sure.
He walked back with me, and it was such a comfort. And one thing I remember him always telling me is that despair is the work of the devil. And I would come in and I'd be in a despairing state. And he would say, despair is the work of the devil. Okay, well, I'm not going to do that. So, but shortly after, as I said, we were supposed to be married in the church on February 12th. And I walked into the church, which was 2 days before my chrismation now. And I came into the church, and I remember going, like, when I tell this to people when they ask about it, we say I before I even really knew much about the church, I crawled in on the knees of my heart in that church, really, and went up to the icon of Christ. When you go into the church, up in the front, on the right where the icon of Christ always is, I went up to that icon and I looked at him in the icon and I said, I can't do this without you. I need you to be the husband and father of this family. And I feel like he did lift us up and carried us. And to show his faithfulness, he allowed me to be chrismated on Valentine's Day. So now Jesus is my Valentine forever. But even more significantly, the Metropolitan in his wisdom allowed us to have my chrismation on his 40th day, knowing the significance of the 40th day. And that's why he chose that day. So we were able to kind of walk into our next phase of our spiritual lives together, regardless of where we were bodily. So it was really very beautiful.
That's beautiful. Well, and I don't know, I think you and I probably talked about this before, but my son's funeral was the first Orthodox funeral I attended. And I always note that as like the moment that I really became Orthodox. I mean, I had been baptized and chrismated and I didn't really get it. And I was sort of warming to it and figuring it out. And then the funeral is so beautiful. And and you're in such a, maybe a raw stage, but also kind of like soft and pliable. And you can be, God can work with us in those moments, right, but, so much better because we're not fighting him.
We could also become very rigid too.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we can choose to close up. Absolutely. But when you don't, it's just remarkable, the things that happen. And it's just so beautiful. But I've known a few people actually who've converted because of the funeral. Like it's a beautiful funeral. It's crazy. It's so wonderful. But okay, we have to take a short break.
But that's where we were bound. That's where we got bonded through that same experience.
Yeah, it's really true. And it bonded both of us to the church, and then it bonds us to one another inside the church. And before we go to break, I do also want to say, you mentioned that you never were able to receive communion together, but all of those who have died in Christ are in the cup. So he's always receiving communion. You've actually never received communion without him. Not once. Okay, we'll be right back with more Everyday Orthodox.
After Pascha, the Orthodox Church celebrates the holy myrrh bearers, who cared for Jesus' body after he was crucified. But myrrh bearing has a broader definition. It can serve as a metaphor for the practical, incarnate love to which Christ calls his followers. In The Art of Myrrh Bearing, author Elisa Bielatich Davis explores the lives of grace-filled myrrh-bearing saints in Scripture and throughout the life of the Church, offering questions for reflection in each chapter. By following the lead of compassionate saints, such as Joseph of Arimathea and Olga of Alaska, we can learn to embrace a simple and profound way of life in ever-deepening communion with Christ and with others. You can find this book at store.ancientfaith.com. Again, that is store.ancientfaith.com.
Orthodox. I'm Elisa Bielatich Davis, and we're here every Sunday night really because when we think about what Orthodox unity is, I think too often we get hung up on, who's under which bishop and how's everything organized, and I think unity is really It's what Christ prayed about in the garden, right? For all of us to be one. And we can only do that if we learn how to listen to each other and to spend a little time with one another. So thank God for this opportunity. And so I have brought my friend Sophia Kellachow back. Sophia and I actually, we did, I mean, it's not, maybe it sounds morose to some people, but we did bond a lot over sort of grief and about the way that the church handles grief. And I love the what you said about how you saw how the church handles the body, from the churching and the baptism all the way to the funeral in this short period of time. And it's true, right? The body is always treated with such love and such respect. And our world doesn't do that with our bodies too much. And so it's a stark contrast, and it's really an interesting way to find our way into the Orthodox Church. I think it's kind of a fascinating thing. But so, you had mentioned that over the years that your daughter struggled a lot, and you think, the struggles a lot like her dad's struggles, right? Tell us, I don't know, keep going with your story.
I'll just pick up somewhere and keep going.
Pick up somewhere. I don't know.
I have 3 children. My oldest is Catherine. She's 32. And my son, Reader Vladimir, is 25. And I have a little girl named Elizabeth. She likes to be called Ella, and she's 10. And a lot of times people kind of raise their eyebrow and kind of look at me like, And, the people that I'm closer with, I've said, well, we're not quite that adventurous. My husband and I are not quite that adventurous. But so what ended up happening? So here, my husband dies. Both my daughter, Catherine, and I were chrismated on Valentine's Day. And that was just 25 years ago, and this past February. And she was 6.5 when my husband was killed in the accident. And it was, really kind of interesting because I never had to convince her or anything about my late husband. The two of them got along right out of the gate. And, my daughter had a lot of trouble with her biological father. And he was very manipulative and bullying and things like that. And she really had a struggle with him. Caused her a lot of emotional damage. And then she gets this man. And I remember the first time that they really, she opened up about the bond between them. I said, look at him. He's such a clown. And she's like, Mommy, he doesn't look like a clown. He looks like a dad. And I was like, oh, it was so cute. She's probably about 3.5. No, she's probably about 4.5 at the time. Age and time has jaded my memory of the timeline. But so, things were very good between the two of them. They were tight, father-daughter. And so when he died, it was extremely difficult for her because here he and I had, we had Vlad in October. And then, we had Halloween together, Thanksgiving together, Christmas together, New Year together. And, we have this brand new baby in the house, this brand new marriage in the house. And then a parent dies. So, she was feeling, I can't even imagine. And when I had to tell her, which was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, that he died, it was very difficult because that was her daddy. I mean, she to this day doesn't have a relationship with her biological father because of his issues and his treatment of her. And what ended up happening, I never remember seeing her cry when he died. She forced it all down, all the emotions down, and it was so unhealthy. So I had tried to get her to see child therapists and evaluations and things like that. And they were like, she's fine. And I'm like, no, she's not okay. I mean, I was seeing signs like hiding food under her bed or dirty dishes under her bed. So she was kind of binging with food, not purging, but binging with food, medicating with food. really bad food habits. And her room was like, I know kids have messy rooms, but I legitimately could not walk in her room because there was so much stuff, just disarray on the floor. And I would go in and I would put everything into a bag and pull it out and say, okay, let's go through this. And, over and over and over in the cycle. And, she made it through quite a few therapists and, never really had to stay in treatment for any emotional issues. And so here we are. She's 16-ish. I mean, there had always been some issues with friendships and keeping friendships and tolerating people and things like that. And I knew that she had some emotional struggles, but never dreamed it would go where it went. So by the time she was 16, 17, I would say 16 or 17, she started using marijuana, and I caught her. And this could be a whole book, the struggle through addiction. I mean, it really could.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening is she met a guy, and he made her feel like no one else in the world has ever made her feel. And it just so happened that he used heroin, and he loved her too, and ended up taking that beautiful arm that I carried in my body as a baby and injected a needle into it with heroin and got her hooked on heroin. And she was angry with me because I said, this guy is going to ruin your life. It's going to ruin your life. And it was a long, hard road with this, because here I am at this point, a single parent, and I have her and my son, and I threw myself into my education. I had always wanted to be a teacher, and after my husband died, I went back to school for education and finished my bachelor's degree, because I just had, when he died, he died in January. I graduated with my associate's degree in May, and then about a year or so later, went back to school, got my bachelor's, and really, wanted to be a teacher forever. So here we are. And throughout that time, we had lived in Southern Maryland for a period of time, and she was doing pretty okay there. But there were things that were happening that I was seeing with boys, and just things that were really scary as a parent. And when I learned of this boy, and she said, well, she told me about him selling heroin, but never said anything about him using it. And that's when I told her, you need to get away from this. So, she continued to see him, and sometimes would hide it and sometimes would not. But as time went on, she became the every nightmarish movie that you see with people who struggle with addiction. And I don't know how either one of us lived through it, because here I have Catherine, she is intelligent and talented, and she's so she's a sensitive soul, and she's just intuitive and incredible young woman. And here I have this son who is also intelligent, talented, and their paths have gone in such different ways, where she went down this road and he, plays the viola. He's an Eagle Scout. He's now in the military. He's done so many different things and accomplished so many things. It's just unbelievable. Scholarships and awards. And I mean, it gets to where, you sit there and it's like, okay, they're going to call Vlad again, right? And it was very difficult to keep that balance, because I wanted to make sure to support her, to celebrate him, to not make him feel like he was being shorted because I'm taking so much more care of her, and have her feel like I'm not celebrating her small victories because his victories are so huge. I mean, it was a really hard place to be. It was a really difficult balance. And, I've got to share a little anecdote, because one of the things I do, I always was very conscious of it, and I rely very heavily on the story of the prodigal, because these are my children, right? And, I celebrate the fact that my daughter is clean, sober, healthy, and doing well for like almost 5 years now. But one thing I always do, I tell my son every Sunday of the prodigal son for the past, I think since 2018, maybe even longer than that. No, since 2018, because he went to college that year. Every prodigal son Sunday, I send him DoorDash some type of a barbecue or a burger, and I always send a note along with it that all that I have is yours, and I always will kill the fatted calf for you, because I want him to know that I will also kill the fatted calf for him, because we can't forget about the ones that are following, even though we celebrate the ones that have fallen away and come back. I think I need to do that. So I send him a barbecue every year on Prodigal Sunday, because it's just what I do now. And I kill the fatted calf for him.
I love that. I love that, because it's true. It is, different kids need different things, and we have to celebrate them in different ways and discipline them in different ways. And it just is what it is. And so often it feels unfair. But I love that, because it is so important, right? Like the prodigal son, there's the other brother who stayed and he did all the right things.
I always felt bad for him,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, now she's doing well, but there were times like I can't even begin to express the emotions. And Saint Monica of Hippo became one of my heroes. There's a huge icon of her in our church. She is the mother of Saint Augustine, who was a wayward son who took some bad paths and did some bad things. And she holds a scroll. Yes. And it's
wait, what? Saint Augustine went off track before? I think of Saint Augustine as such just like a straight-laced, good kid.
She is like the patron saint of mothers. And I had no idea. He'd been a wayward child, and God bless him. His father was very unkind to him, and it wasn't until his father died that she was able to send him to a good school. And I think it was Saint Anthony that she had talked with and prayed him to healing. And I feel that between Saint Monica and my Inexhaustible Cup book that I have been using. Actually, this is probably my third copy of this book, because ever since I heard about the Inexhaustible Cup, actually, this is a copy that I had given to my daughter, and I even wrote in the inside. But I've been praying this, not the whole thing, but what I do is I take every night, I do a Antiochian and an Icos every night, and I have been doing this for, 7 years.
Well, so for those who haven't heard of the Inexhaustible Cup icon before, just give us a brief, what is that?
Okay, so the icon of the Inexhaustible Cup is an icon that we as Orthodox Christians pray to for people who struggle with addiction, that Christ is our inexhaustible cup, and his mercy just is inexhaustible. It's there, and it's there, and it's there, and it's there. And of course, his mother, she's there too. We need her. But this is their icon, and she's there praying, and he's in the inexhaustible cup. He fulfills us, not the drink or the alcohol or whatever our vice is. So anybody that's struggling with a vice of any sort, mine is ice cream. I'm going to be very honest here. I struggle with an ice cream thing, but it is a good place to go. And the story, if you get the book like this, it tells the whole story of the man who was healed of his infirmity for drink and things like that. So really good.
That's neat. Yeah, but, it is. It's a powerful icon. I mean, both for the person who struggles with addiction, or for those of us who love them. And I mentioned to you earlier that a friend of mine, her mom has a very serious alcohol problem, has had it for decades, and we just started praying before the icon of the Inexhaustible Cup and just saying, Holy Theotokos, Lord, we know you can. Please do. And they did. And there you go. And there was a big change. And, and these changes they don't happen overnight, and it's not magic. But it's amazing to see the strength.
Some of them, you go 2 steps forward and 3 steps back too. I can't tell you how many new parent rehab orientations I've attended. I honestly couldn't give you a number. And I remember the very first one that I went to, the people are like, hi, my name is Betty Ann, and my daughter has, heroin is her drug of choice, and this is our 12th rehab. And I'm thinking, what? Kidding me? And, it was my turn. And my daughter's Catherine. Heroin is her first rehab. And I'm thinking, first and the last. Little did I know. It wasn't until April, my young daughter's birthday, that I realized how April 1st, actually, she was born on April 1st, 2014. And it wasn't until a couple years after that I realized exactly how sick my daughter was. It was really unbelievable. So daughter's struggling with heroin addiction, and I'm trying to just keep everything afloat and keep myself afloat and not lose my mind, my job, my everything over this, and support her, still be there for her, but still learn the boundaries and the things that are necessary. Just like Christ gives us boundaries, we need to give those people boundaries, not because we want to shut them out, but because we want to help to encourage them through those correct paths. Our priest just, Father Nicholas, that's visiting our parish, talked about this path, and there's these boundaries on either side that we can go different degrees within the path, but we need to stay within the boundaries. And we need to do that with those that are struggling, because it's important for them and for us. And I wanted to be emotionally, mentally healthy when she came out of this, and when she came to her senses, and that I could support her there. So one time, while she was in a rehab, she's getting 30 days at a time with the insurance. And I met my current husband, who I need to give a big shout out to, because today is our 11th wedding anniversary. And he said, go and be on Everyday Orthodox. And he is having dinner with our little girl. So, honey, thank you. May God
and
bless
please
you
thank him for me. Please,
you just did.
Pass it on. Yes, thank you.
When you come to Harrisburg, right?
Yes. When I come retire in Harrisburg, as I am planning to do one of these days, somehow. I don't know how, but I'm working on it. But but truly, it was a big deal for him to take you on, honestly, right? Like, I remember I have 5 kids, right? And I was divorced. My husband, when I was getting married, a friend of mine was like, that's a big deal because you've got a lot of kids and they're loud. And I was like, at first sort of taken aback, like, come on, they're great. But, it is true. And especially, you have a daughter who is struggling with addiction. And so you raise her daughter, and we didn't really dwell on that a lot, but you have custody of her daughter, right? And you take care of her.
We've adopted her completely outright. And, I kind of, I don't know, he and I both kind of wince at that whole idea of he took a lot on. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's good. You should wince at it, honestly, because it's like, what is that? Man, I know, lucky, So, what a lucky guy. He should be thanking his lucky stars.
You know what, actually, to know some of the backstory, like, there is such a rich, and I don't think I would, I don't know, maybe someday I'd be comfortable telling the whole story, but as of today, I'm not comfortable telling the whole story. But there is such a rich, thick vein of salvation through this story, sacrificial salvation on all of our parts, including my oldest daughter. I mean, it's mind blowing. Maybe I'll call you after the show and tell you about it, because
I would love that.
It's good stuff. But so what happened, he and I got together, and he had been on the tail end of a divorce. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to be bothered with this. When you're completely, like, when everything is done, look me up. And so I've got this daughter struggling. I didn't know quite how bad, but I knew she was struggling. Son is excelling. I had just finished up my master's degree in education in curriculum and instruction. And we had been talking with my spiritual father, and he said, you know what, Sophia, I think you need to go on a mission trip. And I said, really? And he said, yep. He said, why don't you come to Alaska? He said, we're going to be celebrating the Feast of St. Herman. We're going to do a pilgrimage. And I know OCMC does these fantastic trips. So we did fish fries to raise money, fishers of men, help us become fishers of men, the fish fry. And we did all these things. And we took an Amtrak train from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, out to Reno, Nevada, and hopped on a plane, went out to Alaska, and we did this phenomenal, in my opinion, my daughter included. It was the three of us, my son, my daughter, and myself, over in Old Harbor, where we helped to tear down a shed and rebuild. We worked with the elders. We ran a church school program for the children, and it was unbelievable. So after that, we came back to Kodiak proper, and we were there for a couple days at the seminary, and we were able to take this beautiful boat with the Metropolitan, and we went over to Spruce Island for the pilgrimage. And it just so happened that when I was in Spruce Island, I'll tell you, I had these experiences that were so incredibly rich. And I felt so spoiled during those, and I didn't realize that it was a huge feeding for a long time of starvation afterwards, that, Christ was really building me up so that I would be able to survive the hunger years, because they came. They were hard. And I showed you this before. I'm going to show it now. I have this beautiful icon of St. Herman, and this was blessed on his relics in his casket in the cathedral in Kodiak. And, it was strange, because I've thought, what happened on that trip? I feel like ever since I've gotten home, my life has been in a shambles. It's been chaos. And it was like, why did I even take that trip? And, really that trip, I feel, was just such preparation for, the deep drug addiction. And then she got pregnant and came home, had the baby. She was sober and clean in our home and carried this child and was doing so well. And, the baby came on April 1st, and everybody thought it was just a joke. It was not a joke. And she arrived, and she was perfect and no problems, perfect baby. And my daughter experienced postpartum depression, and rather than seeking help from her practitioner or talking to me, she went right back out and relapsed, and took the child in the car with her and used heroin while she was driving with this baby in the car. I lost my mind, and we took custody of her and adopted her outrightly. The adoption was finalized 1 year after, like a year and a month after. And when Elizabeth was turning 2, as I said, she was born on April 1st. Her birth father, also an addict, died of an overdose the night before her second birthday, on the eve of her second birthday. So this girl has a lot of heavy things in her history, but she is a light in this world. She is such a light in this world. She will give you a run for your money. She is spunky and holy and smart and just such an amazing little person. And we feel, for the longest time, and this is where, remember I talked about grief and gratitude coexisting? This is where all that story comes in, because there was so much time of my life where I was saying, God, why me? Why me? Why did you take my husband? Why did you give me an addict? Why did you give me a baby? Why did you do this? And then finally I found that spot of thanksgiving, and that changed everything. I understand now, like you did, how you became Orthodox at the funeral. I understood when I finally got the idea of Thanksgiving, how they could say with Thanksgiving, make your requests be made known unto God, and the peace which surpasses all understanding will guard your heart. And ever since I gained that idea of Thanksgiving, everything changed. And I went from why me to humbly saying, you know what? How me? Why me? How can you trust me with this? How can you trust me with this person who needs so much care? This woman who is now, I mean, my daughter is truly every story you've read, from all of the ugly things that they do, selling her things, selling herself, almost dying, going missing, being kidnapped, being raped, being beaten. She's been through it all. And how could God put me in the place of a mother for that child? How could God put me in the place of a mother, this boy that I have, who I swear one day he's going to be a saint? And then this little girl who has such high needs, and not high needs in terms of her abilities,
Right.
but she's going to need a lot of support to make sense of her world and be okay in it. And then, he trusted me with this man, my husband, Subdeacon Andrew, who has had his own trauma with being in the military, and had been struggling really bad with some PTSD. And he was very difficult to live with for a period of time. And how could God put me in this position to be ministering to everybody? And I didn't understand it until I got the gratitude, and I was like, oh, well, that makes sense.
When you turn it into, Lord, thank you for giving me, for trusting me with this sacred task, it suddenly, it's a whole different thing. It's a whole different, it really does. And I think that's why St. Paul puts that in there, with gratitude, and people fly right past it. And it's like, no, that's
I
the
didn't
thing.
fly past
That's
it.
the
I got
key.
hung up on it. I got so hung up on it. And I would research it, and I'm looking for, commentary on this idea of
really?
giving. And I was looking at memes to try and see if
it's too bad you didn't find one of my blog posts. I used to talk about that ad nauseum. I used to annoy everybody with it, but it's so profound. It's so fascinating. But okay, we have just a couple minutes. And so we have to say, last time the story ended a little early, and then there was a month intervening. What has happened in this past month? What's going on?
This past month, God has shown his faithfulness in ways that I couldn't imagine. If anybody said that prayer doesn't work, I would say, you know what? You're a liar. Try harder. Keep trying. Keep knocking. Don't stop knocking until the door is opened. Throughout the past month since we've talked, I'm going to start with my husband, because I'm so proud of him. He has been with the VA, and he's been working through his PTSD, and there's so much more harmony in our home. And my little girl has been in such a better place emotionally than she ever was, because of the harmony in our home. And my daughter, who, our relationship has been so strained over the years, because think of the dynamics. She's the drug addict, I'm the parent. She gets mad at me for doing the right thing. I'm trying to still have a relationship. Now I have her daughter. She feels like I cheated her out of her own child. And, there's so much, the resentment and all these things that have been churning for years. And everybody's in a good place. We just had a beautiful lunch together, and us three girls, me and my two girls, we got to sit and have a beautiful lunch and just be together in love and true fellowship, and no more resentments or anything. I mean, it just feels like all of a sudden this blanket of grace was just placed over my home. And, I really believe that it's the love and faithfulness of Christ. There's no other explanation that I can find for it.
I think you're right. I think there's no other explanation. Well, Sophia, thank you so much for coming on our show. Thank you.
Thank you for having me twice.
Thanks for coming on twice.
Ignoring me twice.
It was
like
awesome.
I said, third time I'm coming on. I want to interview you.
I love that. I love that idea.
So we'll pick a date.
Let's talk about it. Let's do it. But all right. I don't want to say goodbye because I love hanging out with you, but thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh my God.
All right. And thank you to our audience for joining us for another episode of Everyday Orthodox. We'll be back next week. We'll see you then.